Hello, hello. Hey, John. Good evening.
Still can't believe that I still can't believe you just recorded that recently.
I've got video evidence. That means it's true.
So do you practice the trombone pretty frequently, or because
No, I pulled it. I pulled it out of the attic. Played that song. I wish I could say I did on the first take, but I had technical issues, and so it actually took 3 takes to actually record the whole thing. So that was my third take, and then the trombone went back, put away.
That's pretty good because, like, I don't think I could just bust out one of my instruments from junior high and get right into playing it again. Like, I mean, I'll admit it's not the best quality, but it's still pretty good as far as old Sawmill Creek goes. It's a pretty good rendition. I'm just saying.
I might have a bad connection. I think I heard you said it is the best quality, so thank you. I appreciate your support.
Sure. Yep. I just appreciate you doing it.
Well, John, I got some really good news. I found something that charts podcasts, a website called Chartable. We are actually ranked in the top something in the world of all-time podcasts.
The top something? Like what? Top 5? Top 10?
So
what could it be?
In the whole world, under the all podcasts category, we are ranked 18,037.
Oh,
congratulations.
That's amazing. We couldn't have done it without our listeners.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I thought that's exciting news, and we will hopefully not drop from there.
What's the number again?
18,037.
Out of 18,038? Or
there's probably a reason they don't tell me how many it's out of.
It's probably like 2 million, to be honest.
Well, there are seven point something billion people in the world, and everybody has a podcast nowadays. So we're probably up there in the top 2% of podcasts. If everyone in the world had 3 podcasts, we're doing pretty darn well.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I have at least 4 podcasts just by myself. So, yeah, we're doing good.
Sure you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, there's actually one thing I wanted to ask of our listeners. Usually we ask our requests at the end, but this time I'm going to do it at the beginning. We're going for continuous improvement. So I'm asking everyone right now, if you are listening to this the week we record it, which is February 5th to the 12th, I suppose. We're going to leave this up for 1 week, but we've just done a real quick 10-minute listener survey. So right now, open a new browser, go to withthestonerolling.org, our website, and just click that link. It'll take you to a SurveyMonkey survey that just does a quick 2-minute survey. Kind of what do you like, what do you not like? We just want to get to know what can we do better and what kind of our listeners hoping from us. So I know we had a good response as soon as I put that survey up, and before it was even advertised or anything, we got one response from the one person I told. So thanks, John.
It was a fantastic response. Oh, I didn't know you were going to name me.
It was a fantastic response. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. So,
I don't know. I don't remember. Was there a question in there about the theme song?
No.
Do you really love it. B, somewhat love it. C, listen to it in your downtime. Because everyone loves it. It's just a question of how much do you love it.
And do you
Most
play it on
people I talk
repeat?
to, yeah, exactly. Do you fall asleep
Yeah.
to it?
Yeah.
Do you listen to it in the car with your buddies? Because most people I talk to who listen to our show just listen for the theme song. So
And then they turn it off,
yeah,
or they keep listening for the last part too. Because you can, if you
no,
stick to the end, I don't know if anyone does it, but if you stick to the end, you can actually listen to the whole song.
no, they turn it off.
Okay.
It's
Well,
yeah.
it's there for you. Cliffhanger. No, I don't
Yeah.
think you're allowed to fast forward podcasts. So please do not fast forward to the end just to hear the song again. No, so just real quick, 2 minutes, do it right now. Just go to withastonерolling.org, click that quick survey, and just let us know. There's every question has an option for you to type in other if you have specific answers. Otherwise, just multiple choice. 2 or 3 minutes is all it takes, but it will be very helpful for us to really get a feel for areas of improvement, and maybe do you want more detail, just get through the information faster. That questions kind of like that. And also at the end, just a little bit so we can know who our listeners are, as far as who are we talking to. It's kind of tough to talk to a camera without seeing what's on the other end sometimes, but we do our best. So this will just help us know kind of our audience and what's going on.
Yeah, we just assume everything we put out is fantastic, and so we're just looking for confirmation of that. So
It's good enough that my mom at least tells me she likes it.
oh, good.
So yeah, if my mom likes it, then we're in good shape.
Yeah, that's all we're looking for is the approval of Mrs. Jones.
There we go. Who I don't think is a very very critical of my performance publicly. So all right, well, let's jump into it then. I think we've sufficiently wasted enough time.
Yes.
Today last time we talked about the first Great Awakening. Today we're talking about the second Great Awakening. Seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, the sequel to the first Great Awakening. And this might be a good title for a segment, like a recurring segment, Tyler, is after we do our banter back and forth at the beginning, we could start a segment called Jumping Into It, where we actually start talking about stuff. So this is our first segment, our first ever Jumping Into It segment. So we're excited
Let's
about
do it.
Yeah, we're jumping in. The second Great Awakening. Tyler, I'm going to catch you off guard. Do you know anything about the second Great Awakening?
I know that it comes after the first Great Awakening.
Perfect.
And
that's right.
I know, I don't know if I knew this, because when we talked the very first time we talked on the phone, it came up. I don't know if I had really knew what it was before then, but when you talked about it then, you explained to me what it was. And that's probably when I really first understood it as the second Great Awakening, rather than just great excitement in the land or things like that. Other ways that it's probably been told.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about it today, some kind of the characteristics. And honestly, we're just going to scratch the surface today because the Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening are huge topics. Hundreds of books written on them, but we'll try to tie it into church history a little bit. And next week, we're going to talk about it too. We actually have a guest coming on. We'll talk more about that at the end, I'm sure. But anyway,
you mean we're not going to record live through the big game with a trademarked name?
None of our listeners want to watch the big game. They want to listen to us. They want to watch us talking to microphones. They want to hear our theme song. They want to hear more about the second Great Awakening.
But I do not consider myself a listener of this podcast, so I think I'm free to be able to want to watch football.
Nope. You're a fan.
of
So,
football.
so the Second Great Awakening starts around the year 1800, goes to about 1835 or so. And of course, like I mentioned with the First Great Awakening, these dates are kind of vague. It's not like somebody just said, okay, we're going to start the Second Great Awakening right now, January 1st, 1800. That's not quite how it works. But what it was, like the First Great Awakening, you had an increase in the interest or in religious interest, an increase in religious interest, um, particularly among Christianity. And unlike the First Great Awakening, which started in Europe and then spread to North America, this one starts in North America, around the Kentucky area. And it starts because, like we mentioned last week, people in America at the time, they were religious, but not super involved in it. It was just kind of a part of life. Um, so, for example, in 1790, only 10% of white Americans are attending church. And obviously, that stat, I mean, there's different ways to measure church attendance. Um, I wouldn't say that it's like today where it's you show up every week at a certain time and do the same thing every week. There
It's not
was
like
some of that.
it's not like they took rolls and submitted it to their church headquarters to track for all eternity.
Exactly. Nobody's handing around a folder, or, with a spreadsheet on it. So, but you get the idea. It's just not a lot of people are faithfully attending the same church repeatedly. So, a lot of Protestant ministers see this, and they start to kind of up their efforts to bring more people into their churches. And like I said, most would say that it started in Kentucky and then spreads across the country, particularly into New York. There's a section of New York called the Burnt Over District at this time. Have you ever heard of that, Tyler? That term, Burnt Over District?
No, John, I not that I recall.
Good. So the Burnt Over District just implied that there was a lot of preaching, a lot of religious fervor going on in that area at that time. So around Palmyra in 1820s, most of our listeners, I think, know that Joseph Smith says that there's a lot of different churches, an unusual excitement over religion. And so at that time, around Palmyra, there are a lot of churches, and Presbyterians had the largest congregations. In fact, members of Joseph Smith's family joined that church. Methodism was another big one. The Society of Friends was a big one, and the Baptists. And
Is that
go ahead.
Society of Friends? Is that still around by a different name, or is that kind of just gone away?
It's
I'm not
kind of gone
familiar with
away.
Society of
Yeah.
Friends. Okay.
Yeah. That's what there's lots of churches like that, like the Society of Friends. I'm trying to think of another one. It's like Community of the Lord, stuff like that. I don't know. That's not a real one, but there's
Oh,
lots of kind of churches like that.
okay.
Um,
And one you didn't mention is um, the Unitarian. That's what Joseph Smith Sr. kind of identified as, right? Is that a church, or is that more of just a way of viewing religion in general?
that's a good question. I would say so. Joseph Smith Sr. did not belong to a specific church. He may have had Unitarian views, because Unitarians are uh, almost non-denominational. They don't really espouse a specific creed or anything. It's just kind of like we're okay with everything. Um, And that's kind of how Joseph Smith Sr. was. He just didn't know which, he couldn't find a church that he liked. Um, they did have some, like, I guess, identifiable characteristics. Like, I don't think they really espoused the idea of the Trinity, um, and they kind of got away from, I don't know, the more like specific and unique characteristics that separate every other denomination. They kind of espoused their own, and I don't think they even popped up until like the mid 1800s. Sorry, I'm not a scholar on Unitarianism, but
No,
I
that's
don't think
fine.
yeah, I don't think they popped up until probably after Joseph Smith's death as a
Okay.
as a specific denomination.
Okay. Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of different churches at the time around Palmyra, and so to grow their numbers, church leaders would go out and they would hold revivals, and these revivals uh, were extraordinarily successful.
So what then is a revival? I think I mean, in my church videos I've seen, I see these temporary. A lot of them seem to be in temporary locations, and they throw up a tarp and start teaching. Is that what a revival? What's a revival?
Yeah, they have the tarp on their donkey. No, um, yeah,
I,
I think you have the right idea. So there's two types of revival. I should have specified this. So there's the first type is a revival that just like a broad term that means an increased interest in a church or religion at the time. But in this case, we're talking about a revival meeting, which was just like what you said. These preachers from town to town that are spreading the message. They would go from town to town and sometimes stay in a town for just a couple days and then move on and then come back later. Uh, but yeah, they would, like we talked about last week, a lot of times there's just not a lot for people to do around town, not like there is now, so they kind of be looking for stuff to do, and oh, there's a revival meeting, let's go check it out. And
so did these preachers have their own congregations, and they did this in addition to Sunday meetings, or is it just their job is to go stir up a crowd and then get some donations and move on to the next place?
yeah, so kind of both. Some of them did have their own congregations, they, like a home base. But for the most part, they were sent out uh, from sort of like from a home base. Like there'd be a main pastor or preacher, and he would kind of have different pastors, like people under him. Maybe they were learning from him or whatever, like apprentices or something, and he'd have them ride out and preach to these other communities. But a lot of them, no, they would just go from town to town. They didn't really they didn't have a specific congregation. They would just go around the area and come back. And when they'd come back, the same people would come and listen to them, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's different kinds, but there was a lot of the idea of traveling. Let's see, circuit riders is what they were called. They would go from town to town, and it would be the same town. Like they had their own circuit that they would go to, and people would come and hear them, and they got very popular.
Cool.
Yeah. So at these revival meetings, again, they're mass meetings. Sometimes they would last for a couple days. People would come from villages all over the place to hear, and and the idea was that these preachers would preach in a way that would get the crowd kind of stirred up, to so that they be feeling the spirit in a way. They want the crowd to start showing some emotion, um, sort of evangelism. And again, the idea is to try to get people to come to God. And revivals in Palmyra or around the Palmyra area, Western New York, were very common uh, during Joseph Smith's early years. So he would have seen the beginning of the burned over district, uh, a time when Western New York was just sort of blazed over with religious fervor. So, for example, in 1819 to 1820, there were 7 revivals within 25 miles of Palmyra, and then 12 more within 45 miles. So it's very likely that Joseph would have attended at least some of these. Definitely likely that he heard about them. So he knew that there were things going on and that, there was a religious excitement in the area. Maybe not specifically in Palmyra, but definitely in towns around Palmyra.
So I'm looking at this. During those 2 years, you said there were 7 within 25 miles. So when I
Correct.
look at that, I
Yeah.
think of that as maybe, every 3 months or so, one might pop up within an area within 25 miles, which is a pretty big footprint, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. They're not happening like every week, right? But
Okay.
they are happening, and they do take a couple of days, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to go listen for an hour and go home.
Yeah,
The
I had
idea,
always I'd always envisioned it almost like a flea market where you go from one street corner to another, listening to which preacher do I want to listen to today. It doesn't sound
yeah,
like that was quite the intensity.
no, I wouldn't say it was like that. I mean, I know in a lot of videos it shows like preachers yelling at each other from one pulpit to another, like across a field or something like that. And there may have been like some of that, like preachers meeting each other in the street and kind of going at it. But nah, for the most part, it's like a convention, a traveling convention. Oh, let's go check out what there is to say, and or what there is to hear and sing, and maybe we'll buy a Bible or something like that. So yeah, so it's a large gathering. It does not happen super frequently, maybe every couple months. Because people, they're not traveling back then like they are today. You can't just hop into your car and drive from Palmyra to Manchester in a couple hours. It's like it's a big deal to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Do
they didn't
do,
happen very frequently.
do we know? And this is maybe catching you off guard. Do we know? When I think 25 miles back then, I don't think I would travel 25 miles to go to this. Do we know how many there were right there near Palmyra or in Palmyra? Maybe.
Not exactly. So it's a good question because a lot of people have kind of brought up the fact that there's no specific evidence that there was a revival in Palmyra during the 1819 to 1820. And some people have used that to poke holes in Joseph Smith's history. But you have to keep in mind that society didn't really work like that back then. Yeah, these villages are far away from each other, but that's by design, right? Because people are farmers and they need a lot of land. It's not like now where you can just go to a grocery store to get what you need, or conveniently go places. It's like, no, there's farms in between these villages, and people want as much space as they can get. And
So, are you suggesting then that it wouldn't be unreasonable for someone at that time to travel 25 miles to go to a revival?
nope, no, because again, the revival is going to last for a couple days. And also, we also know from Joseph Smith history that his family members traveled around a lot looking for work, and that
Yeah.
wasn't uncommon. A lot of people did that. you'd have to take a 10-mile horse ride into a certain town to pick up some supplies, and maybe you stay for a while. So yeah, it's not unique. It is. We hear about that now, and it's like, wow, people going around on horses, 25 miles. That's kind of a lot, and it was, but it wasn't that. What's the word? Unusual for people back then to do that.
Okay.
Especially when these revivals are only happening every so often, every few months. So
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So one example of these is a big conference of Methodist preachers in Vienna. I should have looked this up, but Vienna is near Palmyra. Let's see if I can find it. Anyway, it's near Palmyra, and there was a big conference of these Methodist ministers right there in 1819. And so they would have come, they would have, done sort of a convention thing where they talk to each other, learn from each other, visit, share news. But they also would have gone to neighboring villages and preached. And so lots of people around Palmyra were joining the Methodist Church around 1819. And you'll remember in Joseph Smith history that he himself mentions that he was leaning towards joining Methodism. And another interesting bit about that is that there's a sort of a non-Mormon source that confirms that. There's a newspaper man in Palmyra named Orsamus Turner or Samus Turner, I don't know. But he confirmed that Joseph Smith, as a young boy, quote, caught a spark of Methodism in the camp meeting near Vienna. So we know that because of this big conference that they were doing, the Methodist preachers, Joseph must have gone to one of these, or at least heard what was said at one of them, and seriously considered joining a Methodist church. We also know that.
Is that the church that his mom and sisters and maybe other siblings did join?
No, they were in a Presbyterian church.
They were Presbyterian, so he would have been the only one in his family that was in the Methodist.
As far as I know. So in the Presbyterian church, there was his mom, I think Hiram, maybe 2 or 3 others. And then I think with Methodism, he's the only one, as far as I know. He may have had another sibling that was interested in it, but as far as I know, he was the only one.
Okay.
So, yeah, we also know from outside non-Mormon sources that in 1820, Methodist membership in Western New York grew by 2,256 members, which was the largest increase in the Methodist church there ever. So there's ample proof that there was a lot of religious fervor going on in that area at that time, particularly among the Methodists.
And is that, there's the 10% attendance rating right there. Do we know, you mentioned that as a number, do we know percentage-wise what the population might look like or anything? Or do we just have this 2,256 number?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this number applies to a large area of Western New York. I think I have some numbers to give you an idea. Well, okay, so these are numbers from other churches, but they kind of give you an idea, I think, of the amount of growth that was going on. So there's a town 5 miles away from Palmyra. There's a Baptist church there that has 87 members. So pretty small. And in 1819, they baptized 22 more people. So you could do the math in your head or on paper or whatever, but that's a pretty substantial amount. Like, I don't know, a fourth of the congregation.
Over 20%.
Yeah, in just 1 year. So it's pretty good. And then there's one, let's see, a Presbyterian church near Palmyra averaged 9 converts a year from 1812 to 1819, but then in 1819 to 1820 they had 80. So
wow.
huge growth just in that
Right.
amount of time.
And I think a congregation like a ward, if you average 9 members a year, that's a pretty successful type growth rate for a typical ward around.
Yeah, by today's standards I would agree with you, and so back then it was huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, we know that a lot of the churches around the area are growing substantially, and people, I would imagine, would go from one to the other. So these numbers might be inflated a little bit. That like they go to one revival meeting and it's like, oh, he's really scratching me where I itch. So he'll join that church, and then the next month another revival meeting with a different church will start up and be like, oh, I've made a huge mistake. This one's way better. So there's that possibility. But I think the point is still that people are getting baptized into these different churches like crazy.
Right.
So there's 2 things that these churches didn't really appreciate. And the first is when people would experience or have these intense spiritual experiences on their own. And one of these would be visions. And during this time, there's a lot of different visionaries, not just Joseph Smith. One, for example, was a guy named Norris Stearns. He wrote a manuscript called The Religious Experience of Norris Stearns, written by divine command. So this is a guy who was living in Massachusetts in 1815. Joseph Smith would have been 10 years old at the time of this guy writing this. So definitely a contemporary of Joseph. And he writes a very similar story to what Mormons are familiar with Joseph Smith. He's a young man. He has a group of friends that are somewhat irreverent, I guess you could say. He writes a lot about how they would mess around in local rivers and cause trouble. And he always knew it was wrong, but he was afraid of losing his group of friends, peer pressure, that sort of thing.
He knew that being mischievous was wrong? Is that what?
Yeah, like they were causing trouble, and
they were being kids.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, he doesn't get into, I don't think he gets into specifics. I think he says like he dams up a river or something so they can have a pool kind of to play in. But yeah, nothing like they're not killing anybody or anything like that.
I've done worse. Not than kill anybody. I've done worse than build a dam in a pool. I got in 2nd grade, I got in trouble for throwing mud balls at the brick wall of my elementary school. It was the only time in my life I was sent to the principal's office. I still feel a lot of guilt and shame for that experience.
Thank you for that.
Just trying to relate. I'm trying to relate to Mr. Norris Stearns here.
Yeah,
I get where you're coming from, Norris, and I don't judge you.
Thank you. Yeah, we all appreciate that.
I don't know if my parents ever learned about that, so I'm sorry if I never told you.
I'm sure they sent home a slip or something, or even called.
I was a pretty good kid, generally speaking, so I wouldn't be surprised if they just wrote this off to I was following bad peer pressure and didn't tell my parents.
I could see that. Anyway. I don't think Mrs. Jones would get upset at a little bit of mud on the school.
But I think I would be in trouble if she knew about it, though.
Maybe you were, and you just don't remember.
Maybe.
Anyway,
do you want me to read what he said here?
Sure. Yeah.
I see a quote.
Yeah. So let me set it up a little bit more.
Oh, okay.
So he knew he had kind of been mischievous, maybe caused some issues, and then one day he talks about having a vision of one of his buddies riding a horse through the woods. So this is Norris himself was walking in the woods, and he claims that he saw his friend riding a horse down the road, and when he ran to catch up to him, all of a sudden his friend just disappears, and it kind of freaked him out, and he went home and told everyone, and everyone kind of wrote it off like, oh, you're just seeing things. And then not too long after that, that friend actually dies. He gets an illness and dies. And so Norris is pretty freaked out about the whole experience, and then he himself comes down with a very intense fever, and he starts having visions that his death is imminent, and that's when he has this vision that you are going to read now. Sorry, it's so long, but
Oh, no worries.
you're
So
good
he
at
wrote
reading.
he wrote this in 1815 is the date?
Correct.
Okay. So Massachusetts 1815. At length, as I lay apparently upon the brick of eternal woe, seeing nothing but death before me, suddenly there came a sweet flow of the love of God to my soul, which gradually increased. At the same time there appeared a small gleam of light in the room, above the brightness of the sun. Then at his meridian, which grew brighter and brighter. As this light and love increased, my sins began to separate, and the mountain of sin removed towards the east. At length, being in an ecstasy of joy, I turned to the other side of the bed. Whether in the body or out, I cannot tell. God knoweth. There I saw two spirits, which I knew at the first sight, but if I had the tongue of an angel, I could not describe their glory, for they brought the joys of heaven with them. One was God, my Maker, almost in bodily shape like a man. His face was, as it were, a flame of fire, and his body, as it had been a pillar on a cloud and a cloud. In looking steadfastly to discern features, I could see nothing. I could see none, but a small glimpse would appear in some other place. Below him stood Jesus Christ, my Redeemer, in perfect shape, like a man. Face was like a man. His face was not ablaze, but had the countenance of fire, being bright and shining. His Father's will appeared to be his. All was condescension, peace, and love. I was filled with the sacred flame and the glory of God. I thought one spark more in my soul would have destroyed this mortal frame. I was happy, happy, happy. I wanted 10,000 tongues to sing their glorious praise. It was a heaven here below for the space of half an hour. But how infinitely short must I come of describing their glory, for want of language to paint my feelings. For the joys of heaven so far surpass all bounds of description or human conception, that Christians here below come infinitely short of forming a competent idea of the joys that await the righteous. Eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, neither hath I entered, neither hath it entered into the heart of man to conceive of those good things the Father hath prepared for them that love him.
Great. That was very
Well,
good reading. Bravo. Thanks for reading that. So what stands out to you?
I mean, there's obvious similarities here with Joseph's the Pearl of Great Price account of the Book of Mormon. I think two beings, obviously the Father and the Son,
Mm-hmm.
a pillar of fire, basically, body shaped like a man. I'm trying to think. There's several others that I'd have to go back and read, but
Yeah.
if someone told me that this was an account of Joseph Smith's first vision, I would probably believe them that this is the same experience.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of similarities. You have a young man who's kind of struggling, who's on the brink of what he considers to be his ruin, his demise, and suddenly he feels an overwhelming sense of joy. A light appears above him, above the brightness of the sun. I mean, that's word for word right there. Um, so so yeah, you have this experience. Norris has this experience that's very, very similar to what Joseph experiences. Let's look at another example.
John, could I ask a question on this?
Sure.
So you mentioned it, or we mentioned it was Massachusetts, 1815. Is this
Hmm.
something that by the time Joseph Smith gave his account of the first vision um, in the Wentworth letter, is this something that he might have access to, or is it so isolated and separate that it's unlikely that he would have ever come across um, this account?
Hmm. That's a good question. There's no direct that I know of, no direct proof that he read it. That certainly doesn't mean that he didn't. In fact, it's there's a very good chance that he did read it. Um, this Norris's account was published and distributed across the area, across New England and New York. It wasn't, hidden or uh, a super abstract account. People knew it.
Oh, so it
Uh,
was publicized to say the least.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was definitely published. So there is a good chance that Joseph read it, and so then the question becomes, well, did he copy it, or did that was he inspired by it, whatever. And I would say as a historian, sure, there's a good chance, but that doesn't mean that it it doesn't discount Joseph's account completely either. It just means that he liked the wording that Norris uses and may have borrowed some. Um, and yeah, there are parallels definitely, but there are parallels with other people too. For example, Asa Wilde had something similar. He wrote his in 1825. I don't have a direct quote from him, but he kind of experiences a lot of the same things. He has questions about religion, doesn't know where to turn, and he has sort of this divine manifestation. And so we can see that Joseph isn't alone in this. There's a lot of people around the area who are claiming to have these divine manifestations, um, and who are telling people that God is telling them that none of the churches out there are true.
You mentioned before we got into these that the church leaders of the different congregations didn't like visions. I would imagine that any proof that God exists would be um, good for the any religion out there to kind of gain popularity and get people seriously paying attention. Why was it that these leaders didn't like these spiritual experiences to occur with individuals?
Great question, Tyler. Um, so
Thank you.
so it is kind of counterintuitive because at the revival meetings, they want people to have these manifestations. They want people in the congregation to feel the Holy Spirit, as it were. So when we hear that Joseph was rejected when he shared his message, it is kind of surprising, but it's he was rejected not because of the uniqueness of his experience, as we've seen other people experience similar things or claimed to. It was because so many people had shared these experiences. These church leaders had heard this before, and for whatever reason, didn't approve of it. Probably the biggest reason was that they didn't want to lose their authority. If everyone's going around having visions and manifestations, and especially when they hear that God is telling them that no church is true, Well, then that kind of diminishes their purpose, diminishes their authority as men of God. And these were men. I mean, I don't, there are female preachers, but for the most part, the Second Great Awakening is fueled by male ministers.
Okay.
Um,
I do have one other question, and I know we're not here to speculate. So if all you can do is speculate, then no need to answer. But we've covered a couple of these visions that were publicized, spread across. Do we have any? And as far as Joseph Smith's accounts of the first vision, it was what 12 to 20 years after they occurred. Do we have any idea why it would take so long for him to publish or even share those accounts, or can all we do is speculate today on that?
Yeah. So we can let me figure out how to say this. So there's no direct evidence as to why it took him so long to write it down, but we can confidently assume that he didn't write it down and didn't publicize it because of the reaction he got. In his own history, he claims that he was immediately rejected by a Methodist minister, and that his family began to receive, threats and persecutions. So, and you have to keep in mind, these are young men. I think Norris wrote his when he was a little bit older too. I'd have to double check that, but Joseph, he's just. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you did mention that the preachers did not like these type of experiences. Were these other publications of visions and things, were they also rejected by church authorities?
Yes, they were. In fact, Asa Wilde, who I think I've mentioned, he there was a newspaper article that came out and specifically wrote him off. I think I have a direct quote from it here. The newspaper is called the Wayne Sentinel, and they wrote in 1823. They reported about Asa's vision. And Asa, his vision said that all denominations were corrupt. And this newspaper said that, let me see, sorry, that to publish to the world the discoveries of heaven or hell, which he supposes he has had in a dream or trance or vision, were anything of this kind to be made known to men, we may be assumed it would have been done by the apostles when they were penning the gospel history. So they're saying that visions cannot continue because there's nothing in the Bible that says they would. And in that same article, it says all such things had ceased with the apostles, and that there never would be any more of them. So yeah, there's definitely direct retaliations against people who are having these types of experiences. In fact, one of the great ministers of the Second Great Awakening, he was technically before the Second Great Awakening, but a lot of what he did kind of leads into it. He was a Congregationalist minister named Joseph Bellamy. And he wrote, man is under great terrors and has fearful apprehension of hell and damnation and is ready to give himself up for lost. So there he is, he's nailing it on the head for Norris, who, as I said, Norris was extremely afraid of losing his soul. And then Bellamy continues, but suddenly great light breaks into his mind, and he sees Christ with his arms open and smiling, and it may be his blood running, and hears him, as it were, say, be of good cheer, thy sins are forgiven thee. Loved thee with an everlasting love, come thou blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom. So he's identifying specifically what happened to Norris. And then he continues, and now he is certain that his sins are pardoned and that heaven is his, and he is even ravished with joy and calls upon all to praise the Lord for his proceeds. Okay, but then he switches gears and he says, for all this proceeds merely from self-love. There is no love to God in it. For all this love arises from his false confidence and not from any true knowledge of God.
So Joseph Bellamy is a minister there, and he's
Mhm.
basically saying that this vision, although basically this vision just comes from himself, that God was not involved in it. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
so right, but he's not talking specifically about Norris.
Okay.
This is a few decades before that.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, but he's talking in general, like these people who have experiences like the ones that Norris had or the ones that Joseph had. It's not of God. It's from his own selfishness to feel better about his sins. Um, and
You're so vain. You probably think this vision's about you. Is that
again,
no?
thank you for
Not
that.
good.
Yeah, no,
My
that was
music,
fantastic.
my musical ability is um,
Is
it
above question.
somewhat. Please do not question my musical ability. Thank you. All right, I
So
got you. I got this Joseph Bellamy now. We're good with him. We
yeah.
can move on. No more songs.
So Joseph Bellamy, he wrote that in 1750. So 70, 70 years or so before Norris and before Joseph have their experiences. So it's this tradition that's passed down right through the decades that you don't have visions of God. That's over and it's done with. We hear that a lot in church history, church history lessons, and frankly, it's true. The overall thought of the time was that you don't have visions, and if you do, it's not from God. It's either from your own selfishness or from some other more sinister source. And then there's another one. Samuel Hopkins was another guy, another famous theologian who preached against individuals having visions. He wrote, such a revelation we find to be contained in the book. So more context. He's talking about revelation in general. So he's saying there is revelation, it's in the Bible or the Holy Scriptures. And then he says, for while other pretended revelations from God, which have been or now are found among men, are without all proper evidence of their being such and carry evident marks of imposture. So, considering the culture of the time, the religious culture of the time, Joseph being rejected for sharing his first vision is really not that unique, and it's not that surprising. And therefore, it's not surprising that he would keep it to himself. And
Gotcha.
yeah, so again, this is I would consider they didn't like this because, well, preachers at this time, they're t- they're going on decades of religious tradition that you don't have divine manifestations like this. You don't see Jesus, you don't see God. And so for them, it is probably against their theology, against their belief, to have people come to them and say, "Hey, I saw Jesus, and he told me your church isn't true." But there's also a challenge to their authority, and they would not have liked that. And that's why during the Second Great Awakening, again, Joseph Smith isn't particularly unique. There's a lot of different people having religious experiences, and a few of them are starting their own religious traditions. And as you have an even greater spread in religious authority, or or a religious say in the country, sort of a democratization of religion. If you remember in the First Great Awakening, we saw sort of a pushback against educated clergy or trained clergy. And now you have an even greater dilution of that. People who are even more ready to accept their own manifestations and to rely even less on religious authority. So for that reason, the Second Great Awakening is very important in American history because you have that democratization, sort of a breakdown of central authority within religion, and you have a greater plurality of beliefs and ideas.
Cool. Well, thanks, John. This has been interesting and added information. Always valuable. I appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome.
Could you give us a little bit of a idea what we're going to talk about next?
Yes.
So next week we're going to have our special guest who we're going to record that ahead of time, and then I'll plan on posting it at the same time for those who don't get the memo. You'll have something really interesting to listen to. But then in 2 weeks we'll get together live again, and what are we going to talk about then?
Yeah, so with our guest next week that'll be posted, his name's James Dupay, Dr. James Dupay, and he is a specialist in early Atlantic American history with an emphasis on religion. So the guy knows his stuff. He's going to talk to us a little bit more about the Second Great Awakening. He's going to talk to us about sort of the significance of it and the major movements that came out of it and how Mormonism is viewed within the movement of the Second Great Awakening.
Is he currently teaching somewhere? What's his...
Yes, he is teaching at Arizona State University. He's in charge of their online master's degree program.
Okay. I imagine that's how you know him. Cool.
Yep.
We'll look forward to that.
Yeah, and then the week after that, I think what we'll do is we'll dive in to another component of the Second Great Awakening, which is magic, and how a lot has been said about Joseph Smith and being a treasure seeker and looking through glasses and doing magical things. But there was a really strong culture around that. Again, Joseph wasn't unique in that. And so, yeah, we'll dive into that.
Cool. Well, I look forward to both of those.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Anything else for us, John?
No, just tell your friends, leave a good review.
Yeah, if you haven't taken the survey yet, please do that now that you don't have any other cool podcasts to listen to because you finished this one up.
Yes. And thank you to Tyler for producing and hosting. And look for us wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Thanks, John. Life's rough and roll on.
Thank you.